It's important for Essential Energy to have a bushfire management plan for the safety of the communities that we serve. We want to ensure that our assets don't inadvertently cause a bushfire, and equally we want to ensure that any bushfires that are started by any other means don't impact our electricity network, which would then in turn interrupt the supply to our customer base. The sort of activities we have in our bushfire management plan include, for example, every year we use light aircraft to fly at low altitude, and they visually inspect all of the power lines that are within our highest risk bushfire areas and look for any defects on the assets or any vegetation that might be coming close to the assets so that we can address those things prior to the start of the bushfire season. All of our asset inspectors who inspect all of our poles and assets, they use drones to look at the top of the pole, at the crossarm and other assets to look for defects, and that allows us to look at things that you simply can't see from the ground looking up at the assets. Essential Energy also uses LiDAR technology where we fly planes at higher altitude and scan the ground and our assets with lasers. And with that technology, we're able to determine how close the vegetation is to our assets and whether we need to go and trim that vegetation. We also are starting to use satellite technology to look at the proximity of vegetation to our assets, both in the visual spectrum and also in other light spectrums, which means we can look at whether trees are dead, dying or diseased and might cause an impact to the network. Vegetation poses a number of risks to the network. The most obvious one is the vegetation growing close to the network, in which case if the network and the vegetation touch, it can spark a fire. Probably the less obvious one is the proximity of trees to the network that can blow over in high winds. And so we have to be very diligent to look for any dead, dying or diseased trees that if they fell over or if they failed could fall on top of the power lines, bring them to the ground and in turn start a bushfire. So in high risk bushfire areas, there is additional trimming that we need to carry out. So for example, in low and moderate risk areas, we would allow branches to overhang our power lines. In high risk areas, we don't allow branches to overhang the power lines because we need to mitigate the risk of that branch falling on the line and starting a fire. Essential Energy is very mindful of the impact of vegetation trimming on our customers, and we've started engaging with our customers in areas where we will need to carry out additional trimming so that they can better understand why we're carrying out that trimming and the reduction in risk that we will achieve by carrying out that work. The Bushfire Preparedness Report is a report that we prepare annually for a variety of stakeholders, including IPART, who's our safety regulator, the Office of the Chief Scientist, and a variety of other stakeholders. And it basically documents all of the steps that Essential Energy has taken in the lead up to the start of the bushfire season to ensure that we're prepared. And it also documents the steps that we take during the bushfire season to minimise the risk of bushfire impacting our network or our network starting bushfires. So, by way of example, on a catastrophic fire ban day, there are certain types of work that Essential Energy won't undertake because they could start a bushfire. And equally, if there's an outage on a catastrophic bushfire day, Essential Energy is required to do a full line patrol of all of our assets before we re-energise the line so that we don't inadvertently start a fire. Recently, Essential Energy has updated its bushfire risk modelling to make sure that we are up to date with any changes that have occurred, both in terms of land use, climate change, and the various other factors that we look at when we determine the risk of the Essential Energy network starting a fire. And one of the things that's become obvious is that there are now areas of the state, they're more bushfire prone and bushfire is more prevalent. And so particularly on the mid-north coast of New South Wales, which used to represent a moderate risk of bushfire, those areas are now becoming a higher risk of bushfire. And so Essential Energy needs to implement different tools and techniques to ensure that we keep our communities safe.